A look at this beast, the AMG GLE 53 4MATIC Plus. No, Mercedes have not decided to tighten up their naming strategy at all. But if you're looking for a wolf in wolf's clothing that can travel 5 people around in pretty extensive comfort, but still get you from 0 to 100 at 5.3 seconds, I think I just might have found your car. The first thing to mention about this car is it's not only the styling that's AMG, it's AMG through and through. That means new engine, gearbox, handling, chassis, suspension, the works. And that really does relate to how the car's obviously going to be driving. But there's no point buying one of these unless everyone can see it's an AMG right from a glance. And I think you'd have to agree, Mercedes have really made a pretty bold statement with the front of this vehicle. Now, I really want to know your opinion on this. Year on year, the styling changes in performance cars between whether they like curved, more smooth edges or sharper, more angularity. And I noticed that BMW are pushing big with the angularity this season. We're getting a lot more roundness with AMG designs, especially with the larger vehicles. Now, I think that suits this style, but forgive me if I say it's a little bit on the American side, a little bit less European, so possibly this is speaking towards a drive to be more globally encompassing. I'm personally a big fan of that angularity, but I really would love to know what you think. Now, in terms of how the grille presents itself, we have a bespoke appearance here just for this car, and I think if you had to pick one word for it, it's got to be aggressive. There is nothing about this car that wants you to arrive at your destination discreetly, but it's got to make a big statement, and with an engine like the one contained underneath this bonnet, I think it's quite important that it achieves that visually as well. So when we look at the sweep around the front here, there are all these different visual levels to consider. There's not only one face here, but many to look at. There are lots of individual styling details. Yes, a lot of it looks as if it's just for visual effect, but it does make a combined very big visual statement. So, right from the get-go, it's coming out of the gate as an AMG. What do you think? That big, bold styling continues round here to the side. We have optional 20 to 22-inch wheels, so that's certainly making a statement within the framework of these massive wheel arches. Again, if you had to pick one word that summed up the side effect of this vehicle, it has to be massive. Now, what I find particularly visually interesting about this car is that during the 90s, there were a lot of complaints, certainly in the UK, from people driving around London in their Range Rovers or Land Rovers. People even called them Chelsea tractors for a little bit because the cars were considerably bigger than the roads on which they were driving. But over the years, that style statement has changed a lot, not least because our road layouts have changed and we're much more familiar and used to seeing large cars. So a car as large as this making a statement about being large is no longer an unusual sight on our roads. I think it really only is challenging when you're a little bit suspicious that the car can't quite drive at the level that the aesthetic would suggest that it could. Well, no doubt that this car can, but a lot more on that later. Meanwhile, we have a massive flank here that comes right through to the back, and everything about the aesthetic of this car is designed to say one thing to you: I'm here and I'm staying. Coming around to the rear of the vehicle, and we have a lot more softness brought in here. Yeah, we still have that massive power suggested by these nice matching exhausts and this really nice air diffuser right on the bottom. So visually, we still have that clear emphasis of power within the design, but it's a lot more soft. We're allowed to look at these lovely round flanks as they merge into the side, and it generally says, okay, I know I was aggressive when I turned up, but maybe when I leave I'm going to be a little bit more gentle. Well, that's until you've heard the throaty growl of the engine coming from underneath. But still, I like the way the rear of this car has been finished off. It is a big car, there's no doubt about that, but at least the presence is a little softer in the rear. But don't worry, it's still nice and sporty. Let's take a look and see what's powering this thing. Well, obviously any AMG is going to be all about the engine, and this one is no exception. What you're looking at is a 6-cylinder 3-litre twin turbocharged, producing 435 horsepower and 520 newton meters of torque. But it doesn't stop there. It's got a 48-volt system, which is also providing an additional, or factored in, 250 newton meters of torque at go, and an extra little kick to your acceleration. That's going to give you a 0 to 100 speed of 5.3 seconds. Now, they tell me it's going to give you a combined fuel usage of 9.3 litres for every 100 kilometers driven. I don't know that I am absolutely brilliantly convinced that that's a number that you're actually going to get while you're driving this, not least because I strongly suspect you're going to be having altogether far too much fun to worry about the fuel consumption. But all of that power is going to be delivered to your wheels by a 9-speed gearbox, and it has all-wheel drive that they say is infinitely variable, so the power exactly where you need it to be at every wheel that you could want it. Now, look at it. It's a beast, and you can see that an awful lot of design effort has gone into making this distinct from its less sporty brother, we should say. All of the components here are designed to increase stability, lightness, and extra chassis control. AMG don't just put an engine into a car, they design all of the systems to go into that car so they work harmoniously, which means that it's not only here and not only this aesthetic that tells you it's an AMG, there's an awful lot of that still to discover once we get inside. Let's take a look inside and see what AMG have done with the interior. Well, I think maybe it speaks to Mercedes' usual standards when I say that there's nothing here that amazes you. You expect high quality materials from Mercedes and a certain degree of finishing, and needless to say, that is exactly what you get when you open this door. There are many, many different combinations of materials to choose from when you go for this car. So if you see something and you think, I don't know if that's really me, all of this silver effect could be a little bit much for some people. Don't worry, there are lots of different options you can have. The controls are nicely set into the door. They're all kind of well laid out that you can pick what you want without touching it accidentally, and stylistically it all looks and works really nicely together. You feel an echoing of the roundness of the exterior on some of these interior buttons, but they're all very tactile, very easy to use, and what I really like is when you give them a good solid pull, they're obviously well constructed and well put together. Now, you may well expect that from a top-end car, but I have to tell you, it's not always been my experience, so it's nice to see that it's well finished here. And let's do the Mercedes speaker grille back of the hand test. Here we go, Thomas, we ready? Ah, finally. A smooth speaker grille. Mercedes obviously a little bit disturbed by my speaker rubbing just there, has detected me and wants to know what it is I'd like. Now, we'll talk a lot more about the infotainment system when we get inside the car, but for now, something very exciting for Thomas. As he predicted, this being Geneva, we have the leather finishing on the seats, but for the first time in the top-end cars, you can now get this without a leather finish. A lot of people, but nobody, I think, more in the world than possibly Thomas himself, would be excited about that. So it's just nice to have that as an option for people who like to have the choice. But, okay, that could drive me a little bit nutty if that... Don't talk to me? Well, that seems to work. So if you couldn't pick that up on the microphone, the car has now asked me 4 times what it can do for me. I'm just explaining it would be nice if it could stay quiet while I'm explaining it to other people. And apparently it understood, so you have to be quite impressed with that. Once you get into this car is when those AMG features really start to take effect on you as a driver, but before we get into that, just a couple of notes on the GLE design itself. So as previous users will appreciate, all of the seat controls are inset into the door itself, and I find that really particularly convenient. If you have an unusual body shape as I do, it's really nice to be able to get exactly the seat control that you want without needing to grope around the side of the chair. It's just a touch that I particularly like. I'm 178 centimeters or 5'10" in height, and as you can see, even with this massive panoramic roof, I still have more than enough head height. Now, I would expect to be honest, in this car. I would note again on the styling details here, if these aren't quite your taste, don't be put off by them. I can well understand why it is they picked this as the show car to demonstrate the styling. It is very contrasting, so that means it picks up well in photographs, and it really is quite aggressive and bold. And again, if you're going to come out with an AMG design, you really want it to make a statement. So if this isn't quite you, don't worry, there are lots of other options available for you to go for. So let's start with a seat. Well, come on, what would you expect? It's extremely comfortable and massively adjustable. Because it's a memory seat, I can easily set it up the way I like it and then make sure when somebody else borrows my car, it can get adjusted back to me very quickly. I think that pretty much goes without saying. What is nice is the way that these controls have evolved over time, but we'll take a closer look at that with the dashboard in just a minute. I don't want to drive Thomas completely mad by making him march around the car 3 times while we're doing this. So let's talk about the styling of the cockpit. Well, we have lots of nice materials. They look and feel great. Only thing I'm not 1,000,000% convinced about, and Thomas, please don't hate me for this, I'm going to ask you to move the camera so you can have a look. Take a closer look at this door pocket on the door. I didn't notice this from outside, but the lower third of this is particularly plastic. And you can't really notice that so much when you're not looking at it directly in the light. That's why I said you're going to have to move your camera, Thomas. But when you look at it in the right lighting circumstances, I just wonder maybe they could have had a slightly different material pick for the lower third of the door. It's not massively bothersome, but it is a small detail, and after all, Mercedes are known for their small details. Car manufacturers these days are really talking about 2 things more than anything else. The one of those is the electrification of their platforms, and the other is the increased and enhanced way in which they are integrating technology into their systems. Now, amongst those manufacturers, I find the Mercedes approach to be one of the most interesting, and the reason for that is for the longest time they were one of the most resistant manufacturers towards integrating touchscreen technology into their cars. Any big fan of older Mercedes, I say older Mercedes, not particularly older, will remember the pop-up, much discussed, I think I should say, iPad-type design that they had. Now, the reason that it wasn't touch was because they didn't want their displays spoilt with fingerprints. Well, needless to say, I think we all knew who was going to be winning that battle in the longer term. But once they decided to go with fully digital displays, and I think the first car they did that on would have been the E-Class possibly 2 years ago, it was all about how to fit a high-quality display screen that would sit well with their styling. And I think it's fair to say it's taken them a while to absolutely get it right. When I sit in this car, I can see the genesis of all of that thinking and all of those ideas. Being a Mercedes, they weren't going to integrate this technology until it worked natively extremely smoothly. And it does in exactly the way you'd expect it to. But also being a Mercedes, it integrates with a lot of the things that we know and love from the older models, such as a touchpad slightly lower down, and we'll look at that in just a minute, and also a really nice integration with voice, which clearly is key. Now, Mercedes have been very enthusiastic to talk at great length about their digital platform. They very much want to embrace the online world and how the car fits with it. Now, all of that might have you yawning at great lengths because it doesn't sound that interesting. At this stage, it's more about the implication of where that can take you, especially as the electrification of models becomes more and more prevalent. As it relates to a car like this, what it means is you're going to be able to get a lot more interaction, data and information, thanks system, from your car through your mobile phone if you're a mobile phone user, and if not, through the Mercedes platform, you will be able to find out a huge range of different things about how your car is performing and how to optimize it specifically for you. Now, as that relates to this car, hooray, we managed to get it back. As that relates to this car in particular, all of the systems on this car are AMG. That might sound extremely obvious and a redundant statement, but it really has a huge impact and implication for the drive. So when we do have a little bit of a look at the lower section here, when we see all of the features that we can adjust The sound, the dampers, the car ride height, the traction control, it's all AMG. The drive modes are specific and particular to AMG. So, the idea behind the DNA of the car is that it will drive like a Mercedes, but not like a Mercedes. Now, if you want to know how on earth that makes any sense, if you've ever driven a regular Mercedes and then taken out its AMG brother, you'll know exactly what I mean. It's just a little bit of a different experience. More power, more performance, more handling, more aggression, but still that stylish subtlety that you expect from the drive of a Mercedes. Now, whether this car can deliver all of that without asking me 400 times how it can help, I don't know. I just told the car I didn't know. Please stop speaking.
Can you say that again, please?
Let's try it again. Please stop speaking. Okay, I think it got the message that time. I'm sure within the settings you can go through and change the sensitivity and how it reacts. But what's really impressive to me since I first saw the newly integrated speech function in the S-Class, and a lot of the technology that feeds down comes straight from the S-Class, it's improving and evolving all the time. And the reason that that's so interesting for a car like this is that, let's not forget, cars have to be able to operate fully without any internet connection. So as much as you may have had the experience of stepping into a smart car and wondering why it's not as responsive as your phone, don't forget your phone is always asking the internet for its solutions. These cars have to be able to work natively without that. So to see that technology come of age is actually very exciting, because I do not want to be spending my time looking down at masses of controls while I'm driving, and more it's going to get easier and easier only to say, "Hey Mercedes,
how may I help you?
Turn some music on." There we go. Now that's just nice. Okay, you might well expect that technology in a car like this, but what I really like about AMGs and Mercedes is that it's always integrated well into the design. They don't generally do something until they can do it well. And I, for one, really appreciate that. Let's take a look at some of that styling detail in a little bit closer detail. Now, again, if any of this is off-putting to you, please don't be put off by this specific choice of materials. There are lots of options. This wouldn't be my first pick. Always you think piano black, why? Now, some of the manufacturers seem to have mastered some magic form of piano black that doesn't show fingerprints. I promise you that Mercedes are not one of those. If you have a look at that, this is not going to work for me. What is going to work for me is the effortless functionality of everything in this central console. In keeping with the styling and design of this car, we have a really rugged, solid feeling to this central console here, and practicality is everywhere. Nice big wells for drinks in the front, very easy to keep clean. Look at that. If you spilt a coffee in there, it's really not going to be that much of a bother to get cleared up. And intelligently laid out too. 2 USB-C ports right here, a nice flip-up cover for a 12-volt. I like small touches in cars, in case you didn't know, so I'm really liking the way that we've integrated this straight into the side of the design, so it's not taking up extra space from where your mobile will be sitting. These work really well in Mercedes. It's so comfortable and natural for you to rest your hand on top of here. And this trackpad, I think, is something that Mercedes nailed very successfully a long time ago. So if you're just not a speech guy, if you're just not somebody who's comfortable touching the screen while you're driving, this is something that's really ridiculously easy to get the hang of. Coming slightly further back. Stop talking. Thank you. If we push on this button here, again, it's always the small features. Look at that. Now, if you're my age or thereabouts, you might remember the days of going into the hi-fi shop and looking at all the CD players to see what had the softest open. That was a cool feature back then. Well, I'm pleased to see Mercedes still haven't forgotten that. That's just nice. I like the way that that opens. We have yet another USB-C charge point back here, and a more than spacious well for storage here. That's all great. We want and we need all of that space. There is a massive tunnel under here so we can convert the power from the front to the rear, but none of that eats into the space that we have available. So the front cabin, comfortable, spacious, light, airy, not in love with this particular choice of materials. You can find one you like. All in all, I would say that's 2 thumbs up from me. Coming through to the back, it's important that as much of that experience of comfort and quality is brought back here as possible. And I'm happy to see that we have the same attention paid not only to the quality of materials but also to the usability of it. That is really nice and straightforward. I love it when rear seat passengers are treated as if they're not an afterthought, and you're not going to have that experience back here. Not only quality but also thought and design. Look at these seats. They've been very nicely designed to offer the maximum amount of legroom possible to the rear seat passenger. There's a nice big carve taken out of the rear of this seat, which makes space, obviously, for the legs of the rear seat passenger. Now, don't be completely fooled. I just set the seat in front for me and I have very short legs. But as you can see, there is acres of space back here. If you have a look over on this side for comparison, you can see that I still have more than enough room. Fortunately, the transmission tunnel doesn't actually eat up too much of your rear space. The reason that's nice is that from time to time you are going to want to fit 3 people back here. It's not the most comfortable experience you've ever had, but it's certainly comfortable enough. I don't feel as if it's really beyond ridiculous for me to fit back here. What do I have in terms of amenities? Well, I have a USB-C charge point down here, and actually I have 2, my mistake, I'm sorry. That's great, 1 for each passenger, and we have our own heating and cooling controls. So between the comfort of the seats, which is very nicely delivered, and the little amenities, I really do feel like I'm being a little bit pampered back here. Well, it won't come as a shock to you to learn that we don't yet have pricing for this car. I can promise you it isn't going to be cheap. So at this price point, I should feel very comfortable and very well taken care of. And I really do. I honestly would find it quite difficult to think of anything I could want back here that isn't already here and at my disposal. So you've picked up your mother-in-law and her sister and you're going to transport them off to dinner somewhere fancy. But your mother-in-law's rugby gear is still making the rest of the car smell. So you need somewhere to put that. Where are we going to keep it? In the back. Well, I can tell you that I have been through copious pages of notes on this car and nowhere have I been able to answer the question, how much room am I looking at? Well, you know how we work here at Autogefühl. We need to give you as much information as possible. And as I think by now you all know what size I am, you should be able to get a fairly decent impression of the available space back here. So it's large but not cavernous. I think you have decent room to put most things. The seats, of course, fold flat. Now in this car, we have 3rd row seating, but we folded the rear seats down so you can get a really good look at exactly how much room you have back here. And these are all nicely electric, so really zero effort to you to deal with whatsoever. This car has 3rd row seating built into it, but unfortunately I think it has been set so we cannot access that at the moment, so we can't show you that right now. Come on, AMG, what are you trying to hide from us? Does it work? Is there really no space back there in the 3rd row? I guess we'll have to wait a while longer to find out the answer. So it's conclusion time for the AMG GLE 53. What do we think? Well, I think it's very much a division based on personal taste. As far as the styling is concerned, there is no dispute whatsoever. This is an AMG. And depending if you like the way that the Mercedes design language has evolved, they say it's Bauhaus inspired. I don't know. That's not what I'm picking up, but still, maybe I could learn a little bit more about Bauhaus. I think is going to dictate how you feel about the visual presence of this car. It is very commanding. But the integration of technology into the car is fantastic. This particular choice of interior styling wouldn't be my first pick, but I really like the way that the styling has been used to pick up on the accents of AMG, to integrate the technology that AMG brings to that design, and to make you feel like you are king of the road. That is, after all, the experience you should have with this car. If you don't get that when you sit in one of these, you should sit in a different one and see how you feel then. So I think there's a lot to like here. Obviously, the proof of the pudding is going to be in the drive. When we come to this technology, you really have to ask yourself how much you're prepared to spend. We don't have pricing for this vehicle at the moment, but I can promise you it isn't going to be cheap. And if you're looking at comparable performance, in a car for an awful lot less, there is a lot in the market to choose from. So really what you're talking about is the total package. And with an AMG GLE, that's all about your ability to drive in great comfort, also very aggressively and at good amounts of speed. So if you have the capacity to do that where you live, oh my goodness, you're going to get rewarded by this car. But I think if you live in a city like Paris or London, you probably need to ask yourself if you really do need the AMG version. But at least everyone you know will know that you bought the AMG version. So if that's important to you, it's certainly going to pay off in dividends. The whole package together is really very impressive. It represents the best of what the AMG technological platform is able to add to a Mercedes right now, and I only expect to see that develop as we progress. It's important to Mercedes to note that at the moment, not all of their cars have any form of electric input, but within the next 2 years, they simply will not offer a single model that isn't at the very least a mild hybrid. So with this 48-volt platform, this is very much a taste of things to come. And if all of that's going to be as well executed as this is, I think we have a lot to look forward to.